Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bharadwaj, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Gautam Bhatia. He doesn't need an introduction, so I'm going to get started right away. Hi, Gautam. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi. Thanks for calling me.
So, Gautam, can you talk to us a little bit about where you're joining us from right now, and how has life been for you? In fact, after the completion of your Dphil and the publication of The Wall and The Horizon, which are now out in the world and here with me. So, if you're watching this, feel free to go ahead and order the books.
I'm glad you're holding up those and not like transformative constitution. So,
I have that also with me, but that's for a later time in the podcast.
I'm presently in Berlin. I'm doing a 1-year postdoc, so October to September end. So I've been here. Yeah, I've been here since the beginning of October. Came back home for a month in December, which was the first time since the pandemic began. I've been here for like almost half a year now. I came here from the UK, as you know. I finished my Dphil, my PhD last academic year, and kind of getting used to a sort of slightly more relaxed pace of life with post PhD work before it gets back to being frantic again back when I come back home.
Right. Given the fact that The Wall and The Horizon both are now out in the world, how are you feeling? Are you happy with the way the books have been received by the public? Was that the kind of reaction you were expecting?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated answer to that, which is that that on the one hand, yes, in the sense that there has been certain kind of recognition from the industry. So both The Wall and The Horizon featured on Locus magazine's end of the year reading list in 2021 and 2022. And Locus is kind of the main magazine of fantasy and science fiction published from the US. So recognition there is kind of pretty kind of industry standard in a certain way. It was reviewed well wherever it's been reviewed. And I was in the long list at the Hugos last year in the new writer category. So in that sense, when you're thinking of critical feedback or reception, it's been good. The problem, of course, is that genre fiction in India is still somewhat niche, and there is an assumption that genre fiction worth reading is published from abroad. So if you have like that stamp of a foreign or a US publishing house, Tor or Orbit or Voyager, and it's marketed like that, then people tend to take it more seriously than if you're publishing from India with an Indian publishing house. So that is as far as perception goes, and also in Indian publishing houses, the publicity itself is almost negligible. Yeah. So either you are kind of a top tier writer where your book gets heavily pushed or marketed by the publisher, or effectively you're doing your own marketing for yourself, on your own social media and your own like channels, which of course is very hard because marketing is it's science. People have degrees in it, so just like doing it off the cuff is not really going to do much. It'll do a little bit, it wouldn't do much. So in that way, the reach of the book is quite limited because of all these structural reasons. But to the extent that it has been read and people have responded to it, it's been good. It's been nice.
Gautam, when you set out to publish these books, and I know for a fact that The Wall, the first draft of The Wall was finished when you were still in the law school, and we'll talk more about that. But when you got serious with it and the Wall was released, did you ever fear that your standing as a constitutional law scholar might somehow be diminished if you're also known as a science fiction writer? Or you were just such a big fan?
My fear was the opposite. That my fear was that people would not take me seriously as a science fiction writer because I'm only known as a lawyer. Yeah. And that fear has not been entirely groundless. People still insist on finding law in those books where it doesn't exist. People insist on reading in constitutional law into the books where it's not there. And the only reason why people do it is because so far I've been known, to the extent I am known, is as a constitutional lawyer, and you wouldn't do that if you didn't know anything about the writer's background. Right. So I think the fear was always that the fear was never that the reception of constitutional law writing would be jeopardized or diminished by this other life. It was actually that the other life would not take off because you somehow can't break out of the first profession that you're actually you're into.
In fact, I did read a couple of reviews which said that Bhatia's The Wall can be placed right next to his work on equality and constitution and so on. How do reviews like that make you feel? What's your thinking when you're reading this?
It's just nonsense. I mean, in the sense that yes, obviously what you write, whatever you write is informed by your worldview, and your worldview is obviously shaped by the things that you do on a daily basis. So yeah, to the extent that I do constitutional law, which involves questions of equality and freedom and so on. To that extent, yes, obviously the things I'm doing there inform everything else I write. But just in the same way, I mean, the things I think of or look at when I'm writing fiction inform the way I approach law. So it's the relationship is symbiotic, and I just think that the projects of constitutional law and the projects of writing science fiction are so different that it just doesn't make any sense to equate the two in any way, other than the fact that, yes, I mean, you write about freedom and equality like in both cases, but you're doing it in very different ways.
Right, definitely. Gautam, you now have over 4 books published, of which I'll only show these 2 because these are the only 2 that matter for now, right? The one on the horizon. You also have over 80,000 followers on Twitter, a Wikipedia page, which I just...
I don't know, only half those followers are bots, right? So should like not take that very seriously. So,
you're very humble to say that, but and so on. I mean, you're a reviewer for Science Horizon, for Strange Horizons, and so on and so forth. Do you ever feel like a bit of a celebrity?
I mean, like, I think it really depends on what, like, what you define the term as. So in the sense that people are aware of the work and of the writing, and in the sense that people read the blog, the constitutional law blog, and people read the books. So in that sense, obviously, like, it's there's a certain kind of standing that's there, like in the public sphere. I'm a participant in the public sphere, but that's like that's really a function of socioeconomic kind of standing and the ability to write in English and caste location, gender location, all of that. So I think all these things that contribute to that, and so in that sense, I think any kind of celebrity status of anyone has to be filtered through that prism or that lens. I just think that all it means is that that because of all these like axes that you stand in, your contribution to the public sphere ends up getting has more reach, or is in a certain sense taken more seriously than if you didn't have all these benefits.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it, and thanks for putting it out there. So I have a lot to talk about today, but I think we'll start right at the beginning and we'll go chronologically. So can you talk to us a little bit about your time at NLS? I've always wondered, what kind of a law student were you? What kind of activities were you involved in? Were you always into writing, or you did a fair bit of mooting on the side as well? And just what were your general experiences through law school?
I mean, writing has been way before law school. I mean, I'm one of those people who, pretty much knew I wanted to be a novelist when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
Wrote fan fiction, massive fan fiction, Harry Potter fan fiction, Narnia fan fiction, LOTR fan fiction. I mean, all of that. So in that sense, I mean, writing wasn't something I discovered in college. It was always there. It went on through college. Unless, I mean, it really was, the usual life that you would have in, law school in a kind of urban metropolis. They played football, did mooting, did a bit of debating, dropped out of debating a little while because wasn't the biggest fan. I enjoyed it when I was doing it, but didn't really feel like sustaining it for too long. And the usual, like, went into town, Bangalore. Nagar Bhavi was far away, so used to go into town on weekends and wander around MG Road and go to Corner House and Mateo, Blossoms, all that thing. It was a good life. It was a nice life. I mean, I used to take notes a lot in my first 2.5 years, then realized that there's no point, stopped taking notes, and then began reading photocopied notes after that. So I think, like, the whole thing, like, it was the whole kind of spectrum. that was pretty much. I mean, I was never very much into the kind of fest, like law school fest, you know, culture, which has given people a lot and people have enjoyed that. That wasn't really my thing. So I wasn't too much into that part of life, although I did enjoy like all the good food that was suddenly available whenever a fest happened. But other than that, I mean, you know, like just yeah, I mean, football, stayed up to like 3 a.m. in the hostel, all of that stuff. Very, very, you know, usual. Yeah.
And when did you start writing the wall in law school, and what was your thinking
It
behind
was
it?
like in third year, middle of law school. You know, kind of the time when you're settled in a certain way, like you feel like you know the system, you know whatever it takes to, like, you know, do reasonably well in exams, and you know you have your set of activities and friends. So like you're no longer really flailing around, which you were doing a bit in your first 2 years, and you're still kind of far away from the end. So not really thinking yet about the end. So it's the ideal place and time to then, you know, do something like writing and stuff, because you do have that mental space and the time to just step out of the whole comfort zone for a while.
Right. You know, Gautam, in law school, especially in, at least from my experience, students are often, and myself included, are very caught up in doing internships, trying to land job offers, that often these literary pursuits get sidelined. Was that ever a fear in your mind that if I don't do law enough, you know, I might not be able to get something great out of law school? And
No, I my first year I interned in Port Blair on the Andamans, which can show you how seriously I took like internships.
No, definitely.
Second year I didn't intern at all. And third, fourth, fifth year, so we had in NLS, we had mandatory internships.
Yeah.
In third, fourth, and fifth year in the long break.
Okay.
So I did the bare minimum. I did like I did those 3 internships because you had to have an internship diary and like kind of get it signed and stuff. So I did those 3 internships because you have to. There was no choice. But other than that, I mean, holidays meant holidays. I mean, you go back home. For me, it was Delhi and chill and you know, like just like really take it easy. So I didn't do that. And even otherwise, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not advising this to anyone. Everyone figure out their own way. This is not a prescription by any stretch.
I'm going to edit this part out.
What helped me was that I was very clear about what I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
So I was completely clear that I did not want to do like cop firm. And no, this is no dissing on cop firms. I just not for me. You know, and so I knew that I was not going to sit for placements. And people kept saying like, because I was doing fairly well in terms of like, you know, grades and all that. People kept saying, yeah, you're saying all this stuff, but when the magic circle comes calling, you'll be the first person. You've seen this many times. I was like, I'm not trying to like, you know, pull a scam here. I'm not even saying I'm not even saying this is some principled like anti-cop firm moral stand. This doesn't interest me. Like I don't want that kind of life. So because I knew that I wasn't going to court, at least not immediately after college. So the whole thing of kind of like, you know, getting enough internships to then get a chamber, and so that thing was also kind of out. So I think that clarity helped. I knew pretty clearly what I did not want to do, and so then that automatically kind of, you know, ensured that there were a range of things that I didn't need to do, and then let me have that kind of clarity. And I think also really benefited by the fact that my parents, in that sense, were always very, very, you know, open and liberal about these things. There was no pressure saying that, you know, right from school, they didn't pressurize me to join coaching. You know, I was a science kid, like pretty much so many others. No pressure to do IIT coaching, nothing of that kind. And then even in college, like no pressure to do X, Y, or Z. So in that sense, it just became much easier to then say, okay, like this is what I don't want. These are all the things I don't need to do. So here's all this time now I have to do other things.
Did you figure out what you did want to do in law school?
I was kind of veering towards academic, you know, work in some way. More again by a process of eliminations, more like at that point of time, no cop firm, no litigation, not really into policy, MUN stuff, which pretty much leaves legal academia as kind of, you know, the option then. So I kind of had a sense from around maybe end of second year that it would broadly be academics, at least to start with. That crystallized over time. and once I had a sense of that end of second year, thing you know that you need to do is you need to basically ensure that your grades are fine. The rest of it kind of follows, but you have to kind of just ensure that is in place. And so I kind of made sure that to the extent I could, that whatever was required to make sure grades were fine kind of was done.
Right. And of course, then you won the Rhodes Scholarship and went to Oxford for the BCL. Was going abroad for a higher education, always part of your plan? Did you always see yourself doing that?
Yeah. So, well, always again, end of second year roughly. So once I knew that it would be academic work for at least for a while after college, then it obviously, then it logically follows it has to be abroad. There's really, okay, for some things it may make sense to like do a master's degree in India, but for me it didn't make sense. So it was very clear that it would have to be somewhere abroad.
Gautam, I must ask you another question. Given the fact that you were from NLS and NLS is known to routinely produce a lot of Rhodes scholars, that kind of privilege is not afforded to various other law students. And from my own conversation with really outstanding batchmates and seniors, I see a lot of people, just self-reject themselves. They say, we're not good enough. What do you think about having been a Rhodes scholar, having been to Oxford, having been to Yale? What do you think about the undergrad law school reputation when it comes to application? Does it matter a lot, or should people just give it a shot nonetheless?
Specifically for the Rhodes, or
just in general, both, a little bit of both, for Rhodes and for just higher education abroad, legal education abroad in general.
Yeah, so for the Rhodes, I think it definitely was true back then. I think it no longer is true. The reason it was true back then, and I applied in 2010, was that although at that point of time NALSA and NUJS were pretty established, there was this kind of NLS was the oldest, and for the longest time it was effectively kind of the only law school with the whole range of kind of institutions in place that would automatically give you the record that would then be appealing to the Rhodes Committee. So a range of things like mooting, like debating, law and society. So basically it gave you the kinds of opportunities through its institutions, its bodies, and its peer group that ensured that if you kind of participated in all of that things, all of that stuff, your CV just would look impressive, and more impressive than people who went to colleges where those institutions weren't in place. So that's not really a function of an individual merit or talent. It's just that you had access to things that others didn't have access to because NLS was just there longer, and those things were in place. I think now it's very different. Now pretty much like there are a range of colleges that have those things in place. Now everyone has institutions around mooting, debating, MUNs, all of that stuff, writing papers and things. So I think that is different now. I think there's still like a gap between say NLS, NALSA, NUJS, NLU Delhi, a few others, and the rest. Again, for the simple reason that there's a certain infrastructure that exists that lets you do things that you wouldn't find ways to do if you were not in one of these places. I think it's different when it comes to applications themselves for master's degrees, because I think every university has a different set of criteria. And so, but of course, again, the college's name matters, and it shouldn't, but it does. But at the same time, there are many more things that matter than say for the Rhodes. But in both cases, I would say don't self-reject, because don't apply, then you're anyway out. And if you apply, there is at least a chance.
You mentioned the infrastructure around writing papers being available across universities, and that sort of tickled a question. And I want to ask that when you were in law school, were you always, were you heavily into just science fiction writing, or did you do a little bit of academic writing on the side as well? Did you publish a lot?
I did a little bit. I took part in the annual CY essay, and I didn't win. I did write like a 10,000 word paper for that. And there were a couple of other things. I wrote a couple of papers for the NLSIR review. I just think that if you enjoy writing, then you'll enjoy any kind of writing, and that includes legal writing. I enjoyed it, and I wouldn't say I was kind of again, as with most things in law school, it's not something that I would break my back over, because so many things happening in law school to enjoy, right? Like there's no point in just like completely immersing yourself in one thing to the exclusion of everything else. I did write though. I wrote a couple of papers, and I was on the editorial board of the NLSI review. So I edited more than I wrote. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Now that we are on the subject of academic writing, let me probe a little further on that. A lot of students, are trying to publish a lot for quote unquote the CV value, and there's often a lack of originality in those papers. That's the feedback I have often received in my submissions. What do you think constitutes, an original paper? Because as an undergrad law student, there's only so much you can know, right? How do you contribute something that pushes the boundaries of academic scholarship, and how do you create?
Yeah, I mean, I think for law it's very simple. You start off with case notes, case notes and analyzing cases that have just come out, right? Because then there's no body of scholarship around that yet. You're not going to in undergrad, you're not going to reinvent, like the law on X or Y, whatever subject is, because it's been written about. There are people with way more experience who read a lot more, who've been thinking about that for many years. So in that sense, they're going to like shape a field in undergrad, but you can read a case when it comes out and write a very good analysis of it, and there's always space for that. So I would say start off with case notes. I began with a case note. I began with this Baragur Ramchandrappa judgment on free speech. It came out in 2008, and I wrote on it in 2009. So I think that's a good starting point is case notes, and then take it out from there.
Right. Thanks for that. And I think after your BCL, you pursued an M.Phil at Oxford and then an LLM at Yale. So can you talk to us a little about what made you, take this longer route of M.Phil than a second LLM rather than a more conventional sort of PhD right after?
Yeah, I mean, the M.Phil was because you got funding for 2 years from the Rhodes.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So BCL was 1 year. And if you have funding in Oxford and you have this M.Phil degree, that's kind of a transition from the BCL. You have this thing where you effectively have to write 30,000 words in 1 year, wow. Completely funded. I mean, and you're in Oxford and you're in the UK. I mean, you'd obviously take it, right? So I did that, and then used that year to do all kinds of other things that you want to do. And then I went for the LLM because in the UK, for obvious reasons, constitutional law isn't very big. So I felt I needed like solid grounding in constitutional law.
Yeah.
Rigorous theoretical grounding to kind of continue on with that kind of work.
How did your interest in constitutional law develop?
Hard to say. I think we had Sudhir taught our constitutional law 2 course, fundamental rights, taught it very well, very passionately, very eloquently. So I think that was opening initial kind of push was there. I think over the years it became clear that constitutional law is at the intersection of history, of politics, of power relations, of many times of literature and so on. So it just seemed that place where all these things came together. Yeah. And so it just seemed like very, very interesting. And once you start, then of course you get immersed into it.
Yeah. And so, when you were abroad, you were studying and everything, the first draft of The Wall was already complete. Talk to us about what was happening with science fiction and The Wall. Why did you shelve it? I understand there must have been other responsibilities, but what was going on in your mind about science fiction in general?
Yeah, I mean, so there was like the draft existed, and in hindsight, I'm glad nothing happened with that. It's a pretty bad draft, as first drafts are. That's what first drafts are. And I also think as college students, I mean. So there is this thing in modern Spec.Fic where many people actually achieve success and stratospheric success very, very young. People in the early 20s publish books that become very, very well sold and get awards and stuff. All part of them. It's great. Where I personally feel that there's this famous line. There was this Russian composer, I think his name was, check this up, it's Stoichkovich, or is a famous Russian composer, Rostropovich, I've forgotten the exact name. And there was this very, very difficult piece, whose name also I've forgotten. It was either like a Beethoven or a Bach, I can't remember which one. I'll check this up and I'll get back to you on this.
Yeah.
And one of the students wanted to play that piece, and the composer basically told the student that you haven't yet shed enough tears to be able to play that.
Wow.
Basic point being that you really need to like live a little bit, and really experience the spectrum of things before you can actually seek to perhaps to write or in this case to compose, to conduct or to play music. So I think that in that sense it was good that because definitely there's a massive difference between 20-year-old you and 30-year-old you. Was like a huge difference just in terms of worldview, nuance, complexity, all of that. So in that sense I was glad that it happened at that point of time. I shelved it for the fact that I basically come back to India. I was in practice, and yeah, like practice was practice along with writing the transformative constitution was basically completely taking up mental, emotional energy. So there just didn't seem to be that kind of time or even that kind of incentive to sit and like do the book all over again. So just was suspended for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And around what time did you join Strange Horizons?
I began reviewing for Strange Horizons in 2014. I cold pitched them. I cold pitched them with a review of Jay, the book by memories back today. A book called Jay, a famous book from 2014. Yeah. And then they took the review, and then they added me to the reviewers pool, and began assigning reviews to me. And then they had this opening for articles editor in 2016. So I applied for the interview, and then I was trying to actually make sure that their pool was kind of geographically diverse. So then they took me on, and then since I've been with Strange Horizons for 6 years now. Yeah.
Wow, that's excellent. I want to backtrack a little to something you said earlier. You said don't rush into things. The fact that, at 20 your worldview might be different than what it will be at 30. But and this question is perhaps a little specific to maybe law students and perhaps even writers in general. How do you reconcile with the fact that your peers are moving faster than you at electrifying speed, and you're still there, perhaps not doing enough? Did you ever encounter those feelings? And if
I think those feelings are like really, they're there, and they're there all the time, and they're just like a function of broader kind of the structures, the capitalist structures that we are in, where standing still is taken to be in some way regression, and you're always trying to make sure that you're not being left behind. So I think that it's that feeling is always going to be there, and it's there still, and I have those feelings all the time, specifically with science, with Spec.Fic, not so much with law. I think that the really important thing there is to just kind of find a certain equilibrium, like a mental equilibrium, where you figure out what you're comfortable like doing and being. And once you have clarity on that, then you work towards that. And once you have that, then you're not that much concerned about what others are doing. But it's hard. It's really hard. And I'm not going to say that there's any solution to that. I think it's just a question of kind of much like in Dune, right? When they say like let the fear kind of pass through you, let it pass through you, and then and then you are there. So in that sense, I think this feeling is something you have to kind of live with, and kind of have hold in place, and just find ways to live with it, because I don't think it's going to go away, because like the world will ensure that it doesn't go away. So it's more about just like reconciling and living with it than finding a way to make it go away.
Yeah. And Gautam, I was reading a very, very old interview, perhaps even your first interview, I think back in 2010, which you gave to Law Octopus right after you were awarded the Rhodes.
Yeah.
So I've read that one, and there they asked you, what are your career plans? And you said perhaps going to academia or teaching. And I want to ask what changed, because after Yale, you returned to India to practice the law for almost 4 years. So what prompted this move?
I just say that once you go into academia, specifically legal academia, I can realize that the more you isolate in university, and this is not true for all disciplines. I think it's not even true for all disciplines in law, and not even true for all disciplines in law outside of India.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's something very specific to the way that practice happens in India, public law practice, that makes it very hard to kind of have a grip on it outside of some kind of engagement with practice. Yeah, so that became clear to me over time, and I felt that I need to do both things, for both things to actually kind of make sense. So I don't think that, at least in public law practice, without academia makes sense. I don't think that academia without at least an understanding of how practice works makes sense either.
So Gautam, what are your thoughts on the current legal education scenario, given the fact that most law teachers that are teaching students in law schools don't have substantial practical experience, even when they're teaching subjects like CPC, CRPC, which is heavily procedural and depends entirely on what goes around in courts. Do you think academics, especially for law, should have some sort of practical experience also?
No, I don't think it's compulsory. I just
Yeah.
think that if you're doing like scholarship, I only mean teaching here. I think teaching, there's a difference between like teaching and scholarship.
Yeah.
I think you can be a great law teacher without going to courts. I think like there's no like dichotomy there. I just think that is for a certain kind of scholarship, specifically like constitutional law scholarship in India, you just tend to miss things if you don't know what's happening in courts, because a lot of what happens in courts just is not what's in the judgment, right? So like it's just not there in the judgment. And I think even this may change. This may well, if live streaming becomes like a thing. I think that may well change. And if you have like situations where cases are live streamed, so that you actually know that, okay, like on so and so date there was an interim hearing in so and so case, and the court declined interim relief, and this is the impact of that of declining that, and these are the arguments made. Then I think that the whole thing of actually being in practice kind of goes away a little bit more, because then you actually have a handle on the whole scene. Yeah. Then you aren't just as an academic reading the judgment and making conclusions. You actually have access to the whole process. Right? You still kind of miss some nuances because practice in India is so arcane and depends on so many kind of internal conventions that still something lacking. But I mean, I don't think it's fair to expect that academics have to go to court. Like I think that's an unfair expectation to have, and definitely not teachers. As far as CPC, CRPC go, again, I mean, I think it'll obviously help if you kind of do that model where you have it taught both by a practitioner from like the practitioner's lens. Yeah. But also, I think it's important to have it taught by academics or teachers from the lens of what law should be, because there's this massive gap, right, between the way that the CRPC operates inside courts and inside police stations, and the way it operates, the way it should operate if you were to go by the book. And I think that there's a danger in this approach where everything becomes like practice oriented, where then you lose sight of actually what you're aiming for, what the goal is. Because then it just becomes like, okay, this is the way it's done, and your job as a lawyer is to just like know how it's done, so you can navigate it like very, very well, which yes is your job if you're completely a practicing lawyer. But as a law student, obviously, you should be thinking also not just about how to navigate it, but also about how it's falling short of what it should be like. And for that, you need, I think, the other more normative or kind of lens for that, which for which I think you don't need necessarily practitioners doing that bit.
Yeah, on this aspect itself, Gautam, I'm sure you must have come across the trolls on Twitter who sometimes come at you and say that he doesn't have practical experience, maybe he shouldn't be writing about courts and judgments, so on. What's your take on that? What does that make you feel?
I mean, like it's I think there are two things. One is that like I've just said, I think that you definitely I think need to have some degree of I think engagement or involvement with law in practice if you're like a columnist or writing regularly about what's happening in courts. So I think that's important. But at the same time, I think that there's also this weird, I think the trolls are coming from, I think this weird culture like in Indian practice, which is that you're not really a real lawyer unless you're in court like 9 to 4 Monday to Saturday, because trial courts open Saturdays, and unless you have like 10 matters a day, right? So unless you are that lawyer, you aren't a lawyer at all, which I think is obviously I don't agree with that. I think that's a very odd view of practice, and also really ignores the fact that and I think Twitter is a lot to blame for this. Actually, it ignores the fact that and this is something anyone who's been in practice knows, is that everything that goes up to the moment where argument begins, right, is the thing you never see, which is the drafting, which is the research, which is the briefings. And these briefings could be long, like they could be like 5 or 6 hours long, often with certain senior counsel. And there are like hours and hours and days that go into all of that, which finally leads up to the culmination, which is the senior counsel or non-senior counsel on their feet and arguing in court. And I think that what people tend to, and this is why I think this kind of like criticism often comes from people who themselves are not, really engaged with practice, is that without all of that, there wouldn't be anything for the arguing counsel to actually argue from. And I think that, and we learned this in Aadhaar and those cases. I mean, just the amount of effort it takes to put together the compilation, the lawyer's compilation. And this is not pleadings. This is not written submissions. This is actually just the compilation from which they argue. Like just to make sure that it's paginated, all the cases are there, like in that order, and all of that. That itself is often going to keep you up till 2 a.m. for like a week. And that's something that wouldn't be reflected in the judgment, because it's always like so and so argued that. All of that is practice, so I think that there is this. So I think the mistakes people make is one to assume that unless you have like 10 matters a day, 6 days a week, you're not really in practice. And secondly, to assume that if like the judgment doesn't mention you as an arguing counsel, you're not in practice. I think that both those are the mistakes people normally make in kind of saying, okay, so and so doesn't practice and therefore is not a real lawyer. I think the other thing also, again I think Twitter is to blame, is that there's a tendency people have to like want to record like every appearance or every case they're involved in by saying on Twitter that on so and so date so and so. And I've seen this, not just an Indian thing, I've seen this in UK lawyers as well, US lawyers. This seems to be this thing of like, okay, if you didn't tweet, did you even argue, right? Or were you even in the case? And many people actually, and this is something that my first boss Jawahar like taught me, was that you're not actually supposed to advertise your involvement in the case. Of course, like if you're writing, then to an extent it's inevitable in the sense that obviously you have to say, okay, I am involved in this case, and therefore like my views are therefore filtered to that lens. So this obviously disclaimers have to be done. That's a different thing. And again, like the difference between like that and also between, say, if you're live tweeting like a hearing, right? So which for example in Aadhaar, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do, like Prasanna, me and others, was to ensure that this kind of case of public importance is live tweeted so that people know what the arguments are, because otherwise just have a judgment and you have to go by what the judgment says was argued, right? And so obviously when we are live tweeting and Prasanna and I are live tweeting, obviously we have to start by saying, look, we are in this case, and therefore when we live tweet, you have to like kind of discount, like have a discount for that we obviously want to like not be entirely neutral because we're in the case. So I think there's some necessary disclosures you have to make about your involvement in cases. But beyond that, I mean, I don't think that there's any sense in like saying that I was in so and so case and X and Y that happened. But again, I think there's this now also this perception that if you don't say that, not in any cases at all. So I think that there's a range of things that lead to, I think, this kind of somewhat toxic discourse about who's a real lawyer and who isn't.
I think this kind of tweeting is the equivalent of publish or perish.
I mean, to an extent, And again, I'm not saying that those lawyers are like misrepresenting. Okay, sometimes there is misrepresentation about like who is involved in what case and to what extent. Like there is outright misrepresentation as well. But in most cases, that's not the case. It's just like I'm not even blaming anyone. I don't think I don't think anything like necessarily wrong with it. I don't think it's a question of right or wrong. It's just that people, I think, need to like realize that that the fact that someone isn't like tweeting about their involvement in A, B, or C case doesn't mean that they're not involved. And like I think like this it comes from, I think, this perception where if you're otherwise active on Twitter, if you're otherwise active on social media, posting about law and stuff, the expectation is that you're also going to post about like your involvement in cases, right? But people might not want to. Like this is, I mean, like my friend Abhinav Sekhri, right? Like he, his blog on criminal law, he writes publicly, he comments, and I mean, he's as good a criminal trial lawyer as you can get. But he will never ever like tweet about him being involved like in A or B or C case. So
yeah, Gautam, listening to you talk about these issues actually brought me back to science fiction, and I want to go to that territory now. Being a lawyer can make you focus solely on your side, right? Presenting your arguments as cogently as possible and trying to demolish the other side as best as possible. But throughout the wall and the horizon, I've noticed that, both sides of the story, be it the young Terafians, the Shurtans, or whoever, have very solid reasons for what they do. And it's almost, I mean, for the reader, it's extremely difficult to make up your mind as to who is right and whether the wall should be breached or not. So how did you achieve that? I mean, what was your training in law sort of like a barrier to imagine this kind of thinking, or science fiction thinking is entirely divorced from how you think and perceive law?
I think first of all, it is divorced. Like there's no connection. I think secondly, I think again, like if you're doing law and practice, you're not actually thinking of like how to demolish the other side's case. In fact, you're always thinking of the other thing. I mean, actually, I'm also thinking about how about the various ways in which the case could go against you. And in that sense, you're always thinking about the other side's case. And at least for me, you tend to like kind of inflate their case. I mean, you tend to in your own head make the case better than it is, because you're always thinking of what are the various ways in which the order could go against me. So I think in that sense, actually, the two complement each other. You're not. I don't think that you tend to have one-sided thinking if you're doing legal practice. I think actually you tend to think a lot from the other side's perspective in legal practice.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll backtrack now. So when you returned from Yale to India, can you talk to us about where did you practice? What kind of work were you doing? Which chamber were you a part of?
I mean, I was clerking with Justice Bhatt, who now in Supreme Court, back in Delhi High Court for a few months.
Yeah.
Then I was with Jawahar Raja in the trial courts for a year and 7 months. It was like the whole range of things: domestic violence cases, criminal law, labor law, civil stuff, like a very intense trial office with a focus on domestic violence and labor, a bit of crim. And then I was with CU Singh for another year and a half, little over a year and a half. Supreme Court practice, a lot of service law, fair bit of labor law, a bit of constitutional stuff. There was this classic Supreme Court counsel practice.
Yeah. Wow. But Gautam, at this point in time, and now I think it is time to bring this book out as well. So I think when you were here in India, I think the transformative constitution was being written, and or maybe parts of it were already ready. Perhaps you'll talk about that.
So it was written entirely in India.
Oh, all right. Yeah, great. So I mean, all of us can understand that litigation in Delhi and India can be an all-consuming, grueling kind of an activity. So where did you find the time to write such a heavily researched book on the Constitution?
I think first of all, the writing of this book was really informed by practice, right? Like look at the final chapter, the Aadhaar chapter. Many of the arguments in the earlier chapters were shaped by just kind of different cases that you do and things that you come across while you're actually doing practice. So the two complement each other. As far as where the time goes, I think one thing that people commonly miss out on if they're looking at it from the outside is the number of dead hours in litigation, right, where nothing is happening. So this could be if you're in the Supreme Court and item whatever supplementary item or main list item 105, and 101 basically is like a heavy civil matter in which like Rohatgi and Sagar are arguing, right? Then 4 baje tak nahi aane wala, it's not going to reach till 4 o'clock. Now, I mean, then what do you do, right? So yeah, there are many things you can do, and one of those things could be go to the library, which Supreme Court library is like not really the most conducive place to work either. But whatever, like you go to the library, it still does have a few. I don't know. I haven't been in that building for a while now. But when I was there, it did have some seats you could still occupy in the library. You go, and then if you're in a trial court, there will always be this time where, say, most days in the trial court, if you don't have a cross examination or something, your stuff will end by around noon, right? And there will be like roughly a 2-3 hour gap before office work really starts, right? So so you have that time. So in that way, I think the issue with litigation is not a lack of time. It's just that that time comes unexpectedly. It comes in slivers and in bits and bobs and ribs and rabs. So like you have to kind of make sure that you're mentally kind of just ready. Okay, I wasn't expecting to get 2 hours today, but I do. So now here's when I'll work on the book. So that kind of thing.
But how did you get into that time frame? I mean, I would imagine, let's say you have a matter listed at 3 and the court has, gotten up for a break of about 2 hours, hypothetically. How do you even get into that frame? Weren't you?
Well, so it's easier when you're a junior lawyer, right? Because in a junior lawyer, you're not going to argue the case, right? So so your work is pretty much done. Like you have done, if you're in my counsel chamber, right? Once you have kind of made the briefing note, you have read the cases, you have your own notes, then it's not on your head at that point of time. Like you are prepared. It's your boss who has to do the actual arguing. So you're fine then. Your job is over. Then you can focus on your own stuff. Similarly, in trial court, well, as I said, trial court is different because trial court, you can't really kind of switch off in the middle of like the day. But the good thing about trial court, at least in Delhi, and this is again back when I was in full-time practice, is that most days it's over by 12. Right. So unless you have cross-examination, unless something of that kind, unless specially fixed kind of thing at 2:30 or something of that kind, you are done by 12 pretty much. And then there's always this kind of like 3.5 hours you have, before your boss will expect you to be back and to be like working on XYZ. So then I used to, if I was in say Tisari or something, I would on the way back stop in Khan Market or CP, like maybe go to a cafe and just like spend a couple of hours working and then go to office. In Saket, there is City Walk right next door, so you have this space where you can just like kind of drop in for a couple of hours window of time, do something else that's not your practice, and then carry on. And this could be writing constitutional law, it could be learning a new language, it could be writing science fiction, it could be reading about dance, and it could be anything, right? So I'm just saying you have the time. Like the time is the problem is the time comes unexpectedly. The problem is that you often like to go on late in the evening, and then like your evening goes. So that's the second problem. But in terms of absolute terms, time is something you actually do have in litigation because of the way it's structured.
Right. And Gautam, you've of course also been part of various important constitutional law cases, the Aadhaar judgment, the Aadhaar case, the challenge to Section 377, and so on. How did you get involved in these matters? How did you come to assist all the senior counsels who were part of the team, and how was your role in it shaped?
And I think it depends. It's again case by case, right? So for 377, Jawahar, has been involved in the case way back 2009. So initially, I was when I was in his chamber was when the curative came up in 2016.
Okay.
So I got involved in that way, the curative preparation, and then moved to CU Singh, and CU Singh was on the senior counsel in that case. So I moved from like the briefing chamber to the arguing chamber in a certain way. So his involvement was like that. Aadhaar, there was like this huge group of people, right? Like there were like 20 or 25 of us all working together, and then we just assigned ourselves to various seniors depending on expertise, availability, and so on. So I think it's a bit like the cases find you, and if like if kind of you're known as someone who writes about constitutional law, has a certain kind of understanding of like say comparative law and so on, then seniors will kind of like be interested in hearing what you have to say, because you end up bringing a certain perspective to it. So in that sense, over time, it just so happens that when a case of the kind comes up, maybe the AOR will get in touch, or something of that kind, and then you kind of get involved. So it's pretty much, it kind of has its own certain momentum or certain, development that just takes place if it's a field like you're in and you're regularly writing, speaking about it.
Gautam, you also recently filed an amicus brief, I think, in the Supreme Court of Kenya in the BBI matter. So what was that experience like? Because I think it's absolutely extraordinary that, at one end you're publishing science fiction, on the other, you're running a constitutional law blog here in India, and then on the other spectrum, you're over there in Kenya. So what was that experience like?
It was a lot of fun. It was really, really a lot of fun. Because I think there are certain cases where at some point the case is such that it really goes beyond the jurisdiction that it's in, and it has certain kind of sweeping global significance. The Kenyan BBI case was that kind of a case where it's all about the basic structure doctrine in Kenya, and that's just one of the 23 issues in that case. And it was going up to Kenyan High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. So in the Supreme Court, after the Court of Appeal hearing was over and the judgment was out, the appeal was going to the Supreme Court, and the lawyers to challenge the BBI, they got in touch and said, look, I mean, it would really help if there were like these international kind of like comparative constitutional lawyers who kind of brought in the comparative perspective to like the court, because ironically, since they're asking me, the whole argument has been on Ronald Bhatia is in India, Kenya is not like India, therefore don't incorporate the doctrine, which is like a really reductive way of arguing that particular case. So we're like, you should bring in this kind of diverse jurisdictions that have grappled with these issues to show that actually, these are issues that people think about in other countries, and this is what they've answered them. Which of course is a big challenge, because first of all, like in India, like you're obviously, when you're dealing with Indian law, you have a certain comfort zone you're in. You know the constitution, like you know the doctrine, like you are on firm footing. And whereas suddenly there's this whole new country which like really has its own history and its own context. And so I've began actually before even I started writing the brief, I got like 3 or 4 books on Kenyan history and stuff, and I was just reading up just kind of understand something about the country's like history and constitutional history and legal history and in political history after independence, just to kind of understand what I'm dealing with here, right? So you do all that, and then of course you read the case and stuff, and at some point, like, okay, fine, I have enough of an understanding not to make an idiot of myself in the brief. So so there's at least that, and then you can go and write the brief. But it was really, really good fun, and judgment is still reserved. It's been almost 2 months now, so we'll see when it comes out.
Yeah, well, you mentioned reading, and I think this is a good segue into that, because you do read a lot. I see your Twitter all the time, and in fact, I have picked up so many quality books from your recommendations. Seth Dickinson for one, So I want, extraordinary. What's your approach towards reading? Because you read a lot. Do you
it's really chaotic. Like, it's a very chaotic approach. I see something I'm interested in, I pick it up, I read it. There's no pattern to it. Like,
you make notes of sorts to remember the things.
All vibes. Sorry.
All vibes.
All vibes, yeah.
Right. No, my thought was, given the fact that you're reading so much, do you ever feel like, oh, I do not remember what I've just read? Do you make notes while reading, or do you
I make notes. I make notes.
Yeah. What's that process like? If you can share, what kind of notes do you make? How do you go about making?
I just make notes of lines I find impactful.
Right.
I make them all in a Word document, and when I go back to those lines, I always remember what the context that they were in. So yeah, that's basically the process.
And you do it both for fiction and non-fiction?
For fiction. For non-fiction, I mean, you're reading for different purposes, right? You're reading for like research or like other purposes. So, but this is a fiction thing, yeah.
All right, I see. And I mean, I think the logical part after reading is to move on towards writing. And I want to start by Indian constitutional law and philosophy. And I was listening to one of your podcasts where you said that it started when you were waiting to go to Yale and you had a bit of free time on your hands. So can you talk to us a little about how the idea for ICLP came into your mind? What were your thoughts with it? And what are your
No
thoughts?
thoughts at all. I was like, I was bored. It was like summer. I was stuck in India. Like, nothing was happening in life. I was like, okay, let's start a constitutional law blog and start writing about it. So yeah, I didn't expect it to still be writing it like 9 years, almost 9 years on. But it was just completely. I was literally bored. Like that was it. Like I was stuck at home. I hadn't gone yet, and I was like, कुछ करते हैं यार. So ये करते हैं. So that's it. Yeah.
No, I'm glad your boredom created ICLP, because now that's the blog that it's, I mean, it's the go-to thing, right, for all of us. But coming back to a few more questions on ICLP, when you started out, I'm sure you had a lot more freedom. I mean, in terms of what all you could write and in the way you could write. But now that your blog is read widely, it has been cited by courts, lawyers are reading it, students are reading it, do you feel a bit more pressure in putting out articles?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I think that for me, like, it's always been the case that I mean, you have to like, writing is something I don't compromise on.
Yeah.
So anything else, I think, like, I'm okay with, like, but writing is something that like, it has to be, like, that can't change for me. So in that sense, I don't think so. And obviously, I mean, I'm not going to, like, so obviously sometimes you have to write strategically, right? So I mean, you may be very, very angry with, like, a judgment, right? You can't often say what you're feeling, so you have to obviously couch it in certain ways, and but that comes from just writing in the public sphere. That's not a function of how many people read the blog or don't read the blog.
Yeah.
That's just a function of public writing demands a certain kind of restraint, a certain kind of cool-headedness. That conversation does not, right? So that obviously is there, but beyond that, I don't think. I mean, the blog could be read by like 5 people, 500, 5,000, how many ever. But I think that what is on the blog will not change based on the perception it carries, like, in the broader, like, public sphere.
Yeah, but Gautam, I've always wondered, given the fact that so many people are now reading it, and I mean, as students, even before, I mean, we read a judgment, and this is true for me. I go onto your blog to see what Gautam Bhatia has to say. I sometimes check your Twitter. And
I would not recommend that, but okay.
Yeah. and that sort of, creates an opinion in our mind. And then, of course, I mean, we read the judgment and so on and so forth, classroom discussions. Do you feel a bit more responsible because yours is the only blog that's so widely read and it's core constitutional law? There's nobody else writing on these issues. So when you're writing, do you ever feel there's a responsibility that I present the views that are opposite to mine as well? Or do you still feel?
No, I mean, again, like, that has been the case throughout. So if there is like a well-written piece that argues a thing I don't believe in, I published it as a guest post. Is that what you're referring to, right? Like, you're referring to, like, guest posts as opposite views, or like, or opposite views of judgment being of an opposite view. Like, I mean, did I misunderstand your question?
No, you're going on the right tangent.
So in that sense, so again, from the time the blog began, it's always been the case for me that a well-argued piece that does not subscribe to my philosophy or what I think, I've always published it. In fact, I would say I have published most of the pieces that have actually come that are arguing the opposite way. It's just that I think, again, this is a function of, like, Indian public discourse specifically, or I don't know what, but people don't send blog posts arguing the opposite thing. I mean, but if you actually look at the CAA time, if you look at the hoardings case, and even going before that, there are pieces in the blog that literally argue that the CAA is totally constitutional. In fact, like, ironically, the guy who published that now trolls me on Twitter also. It's like, it's pretty bizarre. So I found it quite funny. I mean, एक को छाप रहे हो blog पे फिर troll कर रहे हो, मतलब यार pick one thing, no? I mean, so that and but again, like, if he sends, like, a new piece, I will happily, like, publish it on merits. I mean, there's no issue there. So there are those pieces, but it's just that they don't come in often enough. I think people, I think, because, like, I am obviously kind of, like, coming at constitutional law from a critical I don't know, like you can call it left wing if you want, but I would prefer like kind of, broadly in the tradition of critical theory, right? It so happens that all my guest posts also are broadly from like that same kind of like school. I think those people think that would therefore I'll be more likely to accept like pieces from that perspective, which is completely untrue, because I don't. It's really based on what I subjectively think is the quality of the argument, and that's what I go on. Now, of course, I mean, if you can make a very eloquent argument saying that homosexuality is like fine, is a sin. I'm not going to publish that, right? So now, obviously, I do have like my red line. I'm not going to publish like what I think is like authoritarian kind of arguments, right? So I'm not going to publish those. Even if they're argued very well, but the red line is like pretty relaxed. Like it's not like a big issue in that way. So in that way, I mean, for me, that's always been the case. It's not it's not that now it's more less or it's just that for me it's always been the case that I would be happy to like publish disagreement all the time.
Because you are in the occupation of legal commentary, and today we're seeing more and more certain segments of the legal fraternity say that legal commentators, by the sheer force of their argument, are influencing the court's judgments of sorts. And I think your Twitter location, always in the lobby, sort of a hat tip to that. What's your take on this entire thing?
I mean, I think it's like really bizarre. I mean, it's just to think that judges are going to change their decision based on what columnists are writing. It's just like, I mean, having been in like a judge's chamber, it is just bizarre. Like that assumption is bizarre. What is possible is that a judge reads a particular article or like, or a piece or whatever, and finds the argument interesting and like thinks about it, right? And engages with it in his own judgment, and may reject it still, right? But that's the point of writing, right? You're in conversation, and there's no point of a conversation where nobody can ever change their minds. So to that extent, yes. But to think that and I think like the accusation is not so much that you are persuading judges by force of your argument. I think the accusation is that you're emotionally blackmailing judges, right? The argument is that what you're doing is you're saying, okay, like if you like judge like don't agree with me, then you are like authoritarian, you are illiberal, you are XYZ. I think that's what the accusation is. That I mean, again, like you really seem to have like a very low opinion of judges if you think that they can be emotionally blackmailed and so easily by someone writing like a blog post saying, if you don't agree with me, or in fact, in my experience, if someone tells me that if you don't agree with me or authoritarian, my response would be to like disagree even more, because like I mean, like, play the ball, don't play the man, right? And so and also like people forget, should just open CY, right? Just open CY and see the language that he uses for judges, right? And compared, and again, this is not at all saying that any of us are equivalent to CY. I mean, not at all. Obviously, like I mean, like the foremost constitutional commentator of post-independence like stuff, like I mean, stands alone. So there's no comparison here. But if you look at his language for judges, it'll make all of us look like gentle, like mild, like British, like politeness and restraint. I mean, so I think people have forgotten like what cut and thrust actually looks like in legal debate. Because CY is cut and thrust. Like compared to that, this is all milk toast. I mean, it's really chill.
In fact, I remember you had once tweeted an excerpt from CY's book where he had written something like, I will first establish what the law is and then I will proceed to criticize it. And I was like, wow.
I'll first establish what the judgment said and then establish that it's wrong.
Wow. I mean, that kind of criticism, and I mean, it's even more intense in the book.
You see what he writes about Krishna here and what he writes about Chinnappa Reddy. I mean, like, it is very, very harsh. Like it is really harsh.
But coming back to another question, and this is a question that I've crowdsourced when I put out a thread on Instagram that Gautam Bhatia is going to be on the podcast, and this is the one question that I got the most. So here it is, straight from the audience. And that is, how do you manage to put out articles so fast? For instance, the Karnataka High Court judgment, the hijab matter, came out yesterday, and within hours, your piece was there, right? And then it was read by everyone, sort of distilled the judgment, made it easier for all of us to understand the issue. Now, I have heard in some of your previous interviews where you've said that, writing is like a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the more easier it gets for you to write. So if you can build on all of those things and tell us how one can actually develop the writing skills.
Yeah, I mean, see, it is very simple, and there is a certain pattern that judgments follow, specifically Indian judgments. Right? And once you've read those judgments for years and years, you internalize that pattern. So you immediately know when you open judgment what to read and what not to read. Right? So like you immediately know that yahan se yahan, from here to here, there will be reproduction of the arguments of counsel. From here to here, there will be like a summary of like X, Y, Z. From here to here will the actual argument be, and wherever there is like a long ass like excerpt of a case, skip it, because it's gonna play zero role in the reasoning, right? And so if you actually do that, a 129-page judgment actually is around 30 pages.
Wow. Yeah.
Which you can grasp in an hour, aram se. There's no problem with that. Right? And then, of course, it's a function of the fact that since you've been thinking about these issues and writing about them for, like, in my case now, 8 years, you know what like the arguments are, where like you disagree, where you agree, and it's just a question of articulating that, right? Which comes with practice, right? So when you put all these things together, like it's not that much of a mystery. Like it's not some magical power that judgment came in the morning, there's a blog post by evening. It really isn't. Like actually, it is roughly a 3-hour activity, where like in like the first 45 minutes or 1 hour, you read what kind of like the essence of judgment is. And again, this is not saying you read summaries or head notes, but you just know at this point of time where the judgment actually, where the relevant parts are, and the rest of it is generally just irrelevant in the judgment, right?
Yeah.
And the next 2 hours are writing about it, like organizing your thoughts. And if you think about it that way, it's not very unreasonable. Like 1 hour for reading and 2 hours for writing is not like that massively fast for a case note, right? Because these are all case notes. These are not like academic pieces. They're just like breaking down a judgment. They're expository pieces, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much it. Like it's just that after long years, you just know like where the relevant part of a judgment is. You go straight to that, and then you know where you stand on that argument, and then you articulate what your argument is in response.
So another question about all of this, Gautam, is that you have sort of done everything that a law student kind of aspires to do. You've been the Rhodes Scholar, you've been part of constitutional matters, you've been educated at all the fine places, but I mean, you've published books, but at a personal level, do you ever feel inadequate, inefficient, insecure about your own abilities? Do you also have these feelings?
Like every other human being, like you have them all the time, right? And I mean, I think the things you've listed out and mentioned are like just a very small sliver of what a human being like can do, and not even things that you should necessarily do, right? It just so happens that at present time, society places certain value upon them that may not be the case even tomorrow. So I wouldn't say that it is everything a law student could do. I mean, I wish now in hindsight I'd spent a lot more time in law school actually engaging with the legal services clinic, for example. Because when I was in law school, there was a dominant feeling was that in NLS the term was sued, like a pseudo. Basically, you're a pseudo if you do all this stuff, and you're real like if you moot. And I fully bought into that, and I wish I hadn't now, right? So I would say that like a person who spent their time on that probably has had a much richer and much fuller law school life than I did, right? So I would like first of all disagree with the framing that it's you've done everything that is to be done. I don't think so. And secondly, like I mean, I said like it's like you feel inadequate all the time. Like you feel inadequate when you read like fantastic piece of legal writing that is much better than anything else you've ever written. there's a great book called Which Side Are You On by Thomas Geoghegan. It's about the American labor rights movement. It's so well written. You read the book, you feel jealous and you feel insecure. Like, this guy who's writing so well, and compared to his writing, my legal writing is like labored and like walking through treacle, right? So in that way, it's going to happen all the time. You just have to again live with those feelings. But they come to everyone, and it's not having done a few moots and done a few cases is not going to like insulate you from feeling all of that.
Wow, that's a reassuring take. Thanks for putting it out there. Another question, I think, and this is a slightly better question to ask: how do you manage your time, given the fact that you do put out a lot of content? You're reviewing for Strange Horizons, you're writing. There's, I think, a new science fiction book on the horizon, if I understand correctly, The Octopus Story. Something.
I'm working on it. It. Like, it's very early days. It'll take time. It'll take a couple of years. Yeah, it's not
a couple of years. All right.
I mean, the whole draft, revision, beta reading, editing, querying agents, publishing, like, it's a cycle. So it's not going to be out in the world anytime soon. So
yeah. All right. But given the fact that your day is consumed by a lot of things, your postdoctoral work, I'm sure, now legal writing, tweeting, and so on. So how do you find the time? How do you allocate these? How do you allocate time for these various activities to do as much as you want to in a day?
I think that for me, at least, the thing is that you have a broad timetable, but you keep it flexible within that. So you adapt to it depending on like what happens. So you may have a timetable that says that you will do Indian legal work, say broadly between 4 to 7 p.m. But if a judgment comes out, then kind of you adapt, right? You do it as it comes out, then you kind of like fine. So I think for me at least, I have a broad timetable, like from now to now will be X work or Y work. And then from then to then will be, so that gives you a blueprint. But within that, you have to maintain a certain kind of flexibility that, okay, today I'll have to drop everything else and, read and write about the hijab judgment, and then I'll make it up. Like, but as long as you have like an overarching blueprint for how you want to distribute your time among different activities, and you broadly stick to it, like you can get a lot done.
Yeah, that's interesting. But when you were writing the duology, I remember reading that post dinner time was blocked out for this. So 8:30 onwards, right?
Yeah.
And all those kind of things. But so I'm just wondering, did your social life ever take a toll because of all the writing and reading that you do?
I often said I don't have a social life. Like, actually, that's basically an answer I give to stop people from asking me annoying questions about like, how do you get so much done? Is this is kind of like a defense mechanism I have that, okay, I have no social life. Stop bothering me. But no, honestly, it's just I wouldn't say I have no social life, but I tend not to go out in large groups, because when that happens, then kind of time just slips through your fingers, right? So I basically I avoid large gatherings and groups of large people, because then it's massive time sink. I prefer to engage in like smaller groups, when you kind of little more control.
How do you unwind? How do you, when you feel like taking a break, how do you unwind?
These days I'm watching I'm watching books here. I'm watching Chinese martial arts fantasy on what's that TV channel called? It's not Netflix. It is wiki.com, vik.com.
Wow.
So these days I watch there's the usual stuff. Listening to music, going for a run, going for a walk.
Fencing. You're into fencing.
Fencing as well. Yeah. There is that as well. Yeah.
And you used to play lawn tennis also, if I understand correctly.
I was in high school.
Oh, that back. Okay, all right.
I love the sport. I love the sport. I love, because the first sport you learn is the one that you can always love. So I love tennis, but I haven't played it seriously since class 9, and I haven't played it at all since like post college. Yeah.
Wow. That's so I'll just quickly come to the two final questions that I have. And so these are like sort of like rapid questions when I list out two things, and just pick one that you think is more to your suiting. Don't worry, this rapid fire isn't as scandalous as the one we're used to seeing on television, and you aren't going to get a hamper at the end of it as well.
Yeah.
So NLS or Oxford?
There is no answer to that.
Come on, really go for it.
There really is, like, there's just two such different places.
If you had to choose.
I just can't, like, they're so different. It's a bit like saying, I don't know, it's a bit like saying, what is the appropriate thing, like you constitution of like South Africa, constitution of Kenya, right? It's like there's two way things you take on their own terms.
Right.
So you can't actually, like, if you ask me Oxford or Yale, I will say Oxford, because you can at least, like, there is there was 2 master's degrees in 2 places. Yeah, I would say yes, Oxford, and there are reasons for that. But I think undergrad and masters is like way too different experience to like do an either or.
Yeah.
So sorry about that, but
no,
there's
I
no
mean,
answer there.
No, that's quite all right. In fact, Oxford or Yale was my next question. All right. But you said you have reasons for that. What are those reasons?
I mean, yeah, it is this, I prefer the UK over the US. The US is a painful place to live in. I found Yale Law School, despite some very good things, to be very insular, inward looking, very obsessed with like Supreme Court politics, very, very obsessed with Democrats versus Republicans, very narrow political vision. Whereas Oxford was just like way more broader in like, what it thought about law and just like, engaging with law in the broader world, which sounds ironic because you think Oxford is the place which is like stodgy and old fashioned, and Yale is the ultra cutting edge, but actually it's the other way around. Yeah. Yale is the one that's just completely obsessed by like American politics, again, with exceptions. Amy Kapczynski, fantastic professor. Like there are people there who are great, but the overall like atmosphere in college was just bound up with the White House like so much, with DC more generally. Whereas Oxford was just like way more, outward looking. So yeah, for that reason, Oxford or Yale for, I think studying law in general.
Yeah, I am going to apologize up front because there's a question that just popped in my mind, and I think I must ask you that, given the fact that you have been educated at Oxford, and I fear this might be a bit vague, but these days on Twitter, I'm seeing certain senior academics from Oxford running this Twitter campaign called Race Me Too, where they're, putting out their experiences of how being persons of color, they face sort of discrimination, and being a legal scholar and a person of color in a country which is, when I was speaking with Mr. Saroj Zaiwal on the podcast, he said it's still a country of natives and very averse to immigrants. So have you ever felt that your work was not acknowledged enough because of your skin color or any sort of racism?
I never felt so, but again, my experience is obviously not in any way representative, so of anyone else. But yeah, I spent 5 years in Oxford and London, I guess, going back and forth quite a bit. And I would say that, yeah, I cannot say at any point of time I suffered from or I had a racist experience. I traveled a fair bit in the UK. A lot. I did a fair few things, fencing and stuff, that kind of really brought me into close touch with, like, white people specifically. But yeah, I guess I was lucky. I guess I was very lucky. I had no racist experience and no bad experience of that kind at all, either on the street or in the tube or academically or professionally. But I guess that's good luck. Yeah, that was good luck.
No, that's great. And was your experience the same in Yale?
I think in the US there were a couple of like borderline racist instances. I can't remember. I felt much more at home in Oxford and London than I did in New Haven and New York. So yeah. But again, like, it's borderline. Even in Yale, it's borderline. I can't just definitively say, okay, like I had a racist experience, like in the UK or the US. I did. Yeah.
No, but that's great to know. And I hope that all the people who do go to Oxford or anywhere in the world don't experience those things that scar them for life. I think that's really worrying.
I mean, I think that often you can't tell, right? I mean, if the porter asks you for your ID, I mean, is he being racist? Is he checking? Can you say for sure? It's really hard to say, right? So I mean, maybe they happened and I didn't know. I'm anyway very oblivious. When I'm on the street, I'm totally oblivious. I may well have been like reading a book when you asked me for my ID and I just put in my ID. So it could be he was being racist and I was too involved in my book to like know. So I mean, I'm just saying it could be it happened. I didn't know, but what I've heard, it happens and happens frequently. So yeah.
Right. So next one, constitutional law, science fiction.
Science fiction always is much older love than constitutional law. Yeah. But I think it wouldn't be possible anymore to like drop either of them because they're both such like important parts of life now.
So being a scholar or being a practicing lawyer?
I've already told you this. Like the
Yeah.
two go together, so you can't pick. It's impossible to pick. You can't be either or. Yeah.
I think I sort of know the answer to this, but I'll still ask: being a lawyer or being a science fiction fantasy writer?
Obviously, right. I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, that goes
Right.
back to childhood. Like it's a much older thing than law ever was there in my life. So yeah.
Right. I mean, what's your all-time favorite book, if there is one? I fear it might be Ursula Le Guin.
I mean, book is a book called Gate of the Sun by Elias Khoury. It's a Lebanese writer writing about Palestine. So yeah, all-time favorite genre book is a little harder. Possibly The Dispossessed or Traitor Baru Component, one of the two.
Right. And which is that one author whose work you think has influenced you heavily in the science fiction area, and maybe also
Ursula Le Guin.
And in the law?
Law has changed all the time. Like it began with Ronald Dworkin, and then it became Habermas, and then became more critical. So there's not been one person in law. It's been like, I think it's changed over time.
In fact, Gautam, I read your piece in the critical 20s, which you wrote in memory of Ronald. I read your piece on Ronald Dworkin, and it was a really, really touching and heartfelt piece. Have you checked the comments to that post? You should. You'll be interested.
Okay.
You'll be interested to see the kind of comments that are there. And I was like,
I think I may have seen them at that point of time. I think I may have seen them, those comments back then when I wrote the piece, which I think was 2013 or 2014.
Yeah, about that time.
2013. I may have seen the comments back then. I don't know if there have been more comments in the last 8 years or so, but I'll go check them out.
Yeah. And all right, with this, we'll come to an end. And I'll just ask the final question. This is the question that I ask all the guests who've been on the show. And this is the first time that I've had a science fiction author on the podcast as well. So I'm sure this will be interesting. Can you list out some book recommendations for us? It could be anything: law, science fiction, history, whatever interests you, but you feel that people should read or would find interesting.
Yeah, I think I do Rex every third newsletter.
Right. I link your newsletter in the description.
Sorry?
I link your newsletter in the description.
No,
consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that like Traitor Baru Component, Said Dickinson, fantasy, fantastic. Dispossessed, Le Guin, science fiction. More recently, I read this year. Good stuff I read recently. Take my books all lying here.
Well, Gautam also runs a blog called The Enduring Romantic, where he...
I've come hardly update that now.
But it's still so useful. I mean, I go to some of your previous, what all have you read, and I pick something out, and it's always fun. So I think viewers can check all of those things out as well, and I'll link those in the description. How about in the law? Do you feel in the law that there are certain books that... Wages of Impunity?
I think Kanabiran's Wages of Impunity is really important for an Indian lawyer to read. I would definitely recommend that as a book. I would recommend this book, as I said, which Side Are You On by Thomas Geoghegan. It's about the history of the American labor rights movement. So I would recommend that. I would recommend like Roberto Gargarella's Latin American Constitutionalism, Engine Room of the Constitution. It's really, really good and new way of thinking about constitution and constitutional law in the context of power and power relations. So yeah.
Would you also recommend the Transformative Constitution?
Obviously, I mean, like, so the first recommendation would be that, yeah.
And of course, Offend, Shock or Disturb as well, which a friend of mine has borrowed, so I couldn't display. But
which is no longer even available, I think, but maybe available on Amazon, but not really in bookshops anymore.
No, but I saw it in Bhari Sons only last week, so it's still being sold.
Okay, well, good, I guess. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good thing.
Yeah. And Gautam, what's in store for you in the future after your postdoc studies? Do you plan to come back, return to
I'm
India?
going back into practice. Yeah.
Oh, back into practice. And what do you plan to go out independently, or do you wish to join a chamber? What is your thinking? Or you haven't planned that far out?
We'll figure it out as I go along. So, I'll say Jack Sparrow, right? Make it up as you go along. So yeah.
It's all in the vibes.
It's all in the vibes.
Yeah. So I think with this, we'll come to an end of the conversation. Gautam, thank you so much. It was
thank you
a delight and a pleasure to have you.